To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
All right, everybody, it is that time of year. You know what time of year it is? It's time for the hardcore gardeners to be on the show, and that's you guys. And so you're going to be privileged enough to learn my super fancy, super technical formula for how much to grow this year. And if you can't hear the sarcasm in my voice, I'm very sorry for you, because this is Judgment Day. This is Judgment Day.
I thought this was more like gardens are dying, dead, and the sadness has set in, and people are grasping for some connection to the gardening world. And here we are.
And that's why this is such a great show, because we are two totally different people.
Yeah, because I have on stretchy pants, jogging pants, footies.
What's a footie?
Like, have you ever gone to the hospital or been in the hospital and they give you the little, like, it's not quite socks, they have treads on the bottom?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about now, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's what I call a footie. And a tank top, my house sweater, and my backyard gardens hoodie. One of my favorites. It's so soft.
So soft. It's funny because a lot of times I'll be talking to Batavia and she'll be walking around with her computer in her hand. And I know she doesn't have any shoes on in it's sock season, so I'd be waiting for her to slip and fall. Now I know why she doesn't, so.
You're so terrible.
I need a good laugh, Batavia. Come on, just one time, take one for the team.
There's only a matter of time. So what I have a favorite pair of boots. They're not, clearly, Timberland doesn't sponsor us, but I bought them years and years and years ago, and I have been searching for them for years, and the treads are completely dust. Right. Those were the boots where I took that spill a couple of years ago. So I only wear them like in the late, like spring, because they're still the calf high, they're not gardening boots at all. And so now we've crossed the threshold of I can't wear them outside anymore, because there's slickness outside and I just can't take any chances. But last year I did find a pair online. So I have a brand spanking new pair.
Just go get them retreaded.
That's a thing?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, so we'll get to the show, I promise. But I was reading some.
Here's your connection to gardening. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was reading something earlier in the year, like a couple weeks ago, and they were like things from World War II era that have gone by the wayside, to save money. And one of them was like fixing things. There's shoe cobblers out there dying for business that retread shoes and stuff like that. So if you got a favorite pair, make it happen, Captain.
I used to, when I used to go into an office downtown Chicago, there are a bunch of different places downtown, but there was definitely a shoe stop in kind of my train station, like a shoe store or repair store. I wonder. It's interesting. Now, the shoes themselves are a bit worn as well, but again, they definitely make for good early in the season, late in the season, if we can repair the tread.
Good mud sliding shoes. There you go, after the snow melts.
I'm trying to tell you.
All right, so here's the deal. First of all, please, if you want to support the show, come join us. Patreon, Apple subscriptions, all that good stuff. Help support the show, keep us on the air. You guys literally keep us on the air with your subscriptions, so thank you so much. And also, take a second after this show, pick your favorite episode and send it to your best gardener friend or post it on your social media so we can help get the word out, because we're trying to change lives. You know what I'm saying? This is the most serious show you've ever heard in your life. I'm just kidding. Not really, but kind of. So, all right. So exactly what's going on is Batavia has heard my method that I came up with, and the big question's always been like, how much do you grow to, how much should you plant in order to grow enough for yourself for whatever your needs are, albeit eating fresh, preserving, freezing, drying, canning, giving away, selling, whatever it is. And this is, I think this is a hard question to answer, don't you?
It is, but it's one of my favorite things to explore.
And so I was planting a bed of Brussels sprouts this year, and I decided to try and figure out how many Brussels sprouts to plant. And I kind of came up with this method. It's not really groundbreaking or anything. Made sense to me, but then I told Batavia, and as the supportive friend that she is, she's like, that sounds like boo-boo. So we even had a question on the Facebook page about this, and I can't, Leonard will pull up who it is so we can give you a shout out. And I wanted to go over it, but this is the exact moment when Batavia is going to really listen. She's going to sit there and hear it, and we're going to discuss it and see if this is a plausible thing that we can use.
Yeah, he laid it on me when I was like wrapped in weeds and aphids and, grasshoppers. Like I didn't have ears to hear.
And it takes a full hour to go through it, everybody. So, I mean, no, I'm joking.
And then we shall determine if it's worth any of our while.
Yeah. But I mean, here's the deal. Nobody's going to be able to give you the answer of how much you need to plant. It's just like with gardening. I feel like it's highly personal, and customized to each individual and their needs and desires. You know what I mean? You may want just a little bit of basil. You may not want a whole lot of basil, but another person may want to have 50 quarts of pesto they may be pesto addicts. I don't know. If I was growing peanuts to make peanut butter, I will have to do some serious calculations using this method to figure out my peanut butter addiction. But then I'd also have to factor in the price for my health insurance and stuff as I have my heart attack from eating so much of it. So there is that. So, Leonard, did you get that yet?
I think is he eating?
He better not be, because if I hear him, I'm going to freak out. I don't like the sounds of people eating. Shout out to all my people that suffer from that. What is it called? Misophonia?
I don't know what it's called, but I always forget which thing. I always forget, is it that you don't like to see it or hear it?
Hear it. I cannot listen to people eat. It's terrible. So, but yeah, so you're going to have
Did I ever tell you about, just to take us off of one more tangent, did I ever tell you about how it took me a long time to realize that although I could hear myself chewing with my mouth closed, I didn't realize that other people could hear me? I thought it was just like the sounds in my head.
No, people can hear you. Trust me. That and the rustling of a bag of potato chips. Now. That drives me crazy.
All right, now you're just being unreasonable.
All right, so what's going on here is Batavia doesn't want to hurt my feelings, so she's trying to drag it out, but we're going to get into it. So this is going to take some research on your end as the listener, the gardener. So don't think that you're going to walk away from this and I'm going to tell you plant 4 potato plants. So, and Leonard just sent the thing to me. So Paige wrote, and this is exactly what she wrote: how to figure out how much to plant so there's enough ripe to preserve at one time. I'm in zone 7B, and this is my 4th year gardening and 2nd year really trying to figure this out. So Paige, first of all, sounds like you're right on track to becoming a pro gardener, because that's about how it works.
Hey, Paige, right in the middle.
Right in the middle. I mean, I didn't even get to finish it. It seems like I don't get enough of any one thing at one time to can or batch freeze. And if I try to hold on to beans or peppers or tomatoes until I get enough, the quality is questionable. I'm going to add "at best" to the end of that sentence because it just seems like something. It feels somewhat overwhelming, and I can't tell you how many hours I've spent with a full basket of mixed garden goodies pursuing UGA's So Easy to Preserve book, only to feel like the book was named rather optimistically. #not so easy. Yes, so I can definitely sympathize with all of that. And this year I actually had this situation with my peppers. We just ended up eating them fresh. I never really got to do anything with them because it was taking too long. And I know Batavia has done this. And we even have a longtime listener who doesn't harvest some of her stuff sometimes for whatever reason. I can't remember what it was, but that can also lead to it too, because you're waiting for things to get ripe at the same time. So we all feel your pain, Paige, and we appreciate you asking. So now the first thing to do is just decide what you're going to do with your produce, right? Are you going to eat it fresh, or are you going to preserve it, or are you going to do both? So is there anything that falls in that category for you, Batavia?
Yeah, so we're going to have to treat this like an onion. And so this is one layer of it. So do you want to eat it fresh or do you want to preserve it? Well, how do you know? Right? It's like many of us didn't necessarily grow up with eating a bunch of one or the other or both, right? You know, garden preserved foods. Now, I've eaten a lot of like frozen things, canned things in your regular old tin cans. Don't get me wrong, right? You know, so I think that's definitely the first step. But I also think that, and this is what I've been doing the last couple of years, you kind of have to test out when eating something fresh. Well, I guess most of us pretty much know what a thing tastes like fresh. You have to test out, like, do you like how the thing tastes preserved? You know?
Yeah.
And if not, you know, that's decision is made for you. Now, you could, of course, go through and like tweak recipes and, you know, try different things. But green beans, I think, is one of the first things that a lot of people can. You know, pressure can.
Yeah.
I think that was something you suggested to me when I first was trying to, you know, jump into the waters. And it's a wholly different taste eating fresh green beans versus canned green beans, you know, and some people don't mind it one way or another, and some people do, you know. So I think that starting with that is the first step. There are definitely things that I'd prefer to eat fresh, and that's probably almost everything. But I don't, thank goodness I don't eat that much, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact of the matter, too, is you're not going to, if you have a big garden, you're not going to consume it all fresh. There's going to be waste at some point, and you're going to waste it. And there's a bigger, you know, layer to the onion here, overarching story, and that's the fact that like the food there's a lot of work that goes into providing food in the food industry. I have a friend whose daughter is I don't know what grade she's in. She's in high school, and they're doing they're taking a class about farmers and, you know, learning about food production and stuff and the farmer's oath. And she was saying like how ridiculous it is that they have to learn it. And the thing is like, she doesn't realize, and she's young. She's, you know, she's not going to realize it, but she doesn't realize how much effort it goes into to produce food that goes to your table. As a lot of people don't. Now, the people that are listening to this show, I mean, you all know, it takes a lot to get a tomato on the plate. I mean, it takes think about it for a second. It's an astronomical amount of effort, especially if you're starting it from seed. But even if you're buying a transplant and putting it in the ground, there's a lot of effort. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of, you know, just that goes all into it all the time. And not to mention the mental stress and worry that people have over their plants and their gardens, which I think is awesome that, you know, we go through that. But producing on a whole is very hard. And one thing that we need to know is, you know, the number one energy waste in this country is food. And by energy, I mean calories. Calories are energy. And that's a proven fact. You can look it up. It's the number one waste. There's always food going into the trash. And it starts at the farm where you have damaged plants, damaged fruits. And if we put it into our world as gardeners and homesteaders, you want to do big batch canning and you can't. And so therefore you kind of sit on your vegetables as long as you can and they all go bad. And then, you know, and I think when it comes to canning, like let's do tomatoes for a second. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about a determinant tomato. And is it any surprise that the number one tomatoes to can are all determinants? Romas being like at the top of the list, like that's a big one because they all produce their fruit in relatively fast, uniform fashion all at once, where you may get a harvest, may not be big enough, but if you wait a week, you'll get double that. And you wait a week and then the plant will kind of just go away and wither away. And that's something to kind of really start this whole conversation with, is learning what variety you're growing, what species you're growing in order to do this. You know, I would not suggest anybody get an heirloom indeterminate tomato to try and grow for canning. I would never suggest that. Would you?
I think that I've had some really rich tomato sauce where I've added some heirlooms in, but the base has been Roma's. I want to add a little bit of color to that comment because I've been really looking into this year. And I think if you're talking tomatoes, a variety where you can closely predict when it's going to produce and how much is super helpful to that effort. And that's the reason why, and the place I agree with you when it comes to determinate varieties. My determinates produce probably for over maybe a month. I could probably go back and look at some videos, but I'm going to guess about across a month. This is the key. And this is the thing that really the alarm bells went off with me today or this growing season. The quantity of plants, hands down, matters for something like tomatoes, probably more than most other vegetables. Because if you're canning tomatoes, and let's say it's tomato sauce, the amount of tomatoes that it will take to produce sauce. I've been growing tomatoes for 15, 16 years, and it just clicked.
Yeah.
Right now, again, there are resources out there. You can go to any of the, the U.S. Food preservation sites. You can go to any of the popular companies that give recipes. They'll tell you this many tomatoes are needed, to produce this much. But it doesn't click until you're sorting through tomatoes in your kitchen.
Well, and how many of us are weighing our tomatoes by pounds before we do it, too?
Yeah.
Let's get real.
And so I think trying to weave in some solutions. Some of the things that I do is I look for ways to use the whole of a tomato. Right, sauce is what it is, but like for salsa, as an example, the recipe that you shared with me a couple of years ago, I used that recipe, and I could just about, whatever I'm pulling off the plant in any given time. I think the lowest amount is like 4 pounds of tomatoes, or maybe it's like 7 pounds of tomatoes. So I can pretty much use the entire tomato, get to a point of preserving then and there. Now, sometimes you got to do some things that maybe aren't as comfortable. Did you freeze any of your jalapenos from last year? Do you need jalapenos in your salsa? Because my jalapenos may not have started to produce yet with my tomatoes. And this is a part of, what Paige is struggling with. So I have my tomatoes, but my peppers aren't ready that I want to add to the thing I'm preserving, or vice versa, Most times probably tomatoes are ready first. That's been an absolute struggle for me. And fortunately for me, the timing has been pretty close for the two, but something like cilantro, I never have cilantro in my garden at that time. So I got to go to the store and buy it if I want to add it.
Well, and the thing is, part of it too is knowing when to plant certain things. So there's a whole thing about designing a garden for fresh eating, preservation, this, that, and the other. And you can start plants at different times in order to try and this takes some practice, but learn when your tomatoes are going to be ripe and your peppers are going to be ripe at the same time. That's a whole thing, right? So a lot of times what we'll do, for instance, is our first tomato plants that we put out, they will grow. We will can those. And for all those that want to make tomato sauce, I'm going to help you out. Please just can the tomatoes straight up, whole tomatoes, and then make your sauce as you want to eat it. It's way easier. You can stretch your tomatoes a lot farther that way than making spaghetti sauce. In our house, my wife always wants to make spaghetti sauce. First of all, the recipe was never really that good. And I told her, I was like, look, if you want spaghetti sauce, just go to the damn store and buy it. But otherwise, I'm going to can these tomatoes whole, and then we can make it. Because you can make, all we use for it is tomatoes, garlic, basil. That's it. And then we have tomato sauce. So that's one of those things you can do. And timing out when you're planting stuff. So a lot of us get super excited, and we throw our plants in the ground right away. And maybe we should throw our peppers in first. Wait a little bit and put your tomatoes in, and then they're going to be, you're going to get the ripening at the same time, if that's what you want to do for preserving, right? I don't do that. I just kind of put stuff in typically the same way, but I'll let my peppers grow in the pots a little bit longer But that's an option that you can definitely have that will help with this, especially if you're trying to make complicated recipes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But like with beans and stuff like that, there's an incredible amount of waste to that, because you're going to go out there to go harvest and there's going to be beans that are overripe. Is that plane landing on the street?
That's a fire truck.
Oh, it sounded like a plane. But they're going to be, they're going to be overripe. So you're not going to use those. And then you're going to have underripe. And then you're going to have, so it's a whole thing. So
I probably threw away, those spinners.
Yeah.
Like, for lettuce. So they keep beans really fresh in the refrigerator. But I'm certain I threw away at least one of those full of beans this year. Because I was, again, collecting them because I was going to can them. And I needed enough for the canner load, right?
Yeah.
Collecting them because I was going to can them. And then I look up and it's like, oh, I wouldn't even eat those, If I had chickens, I don't know if I'd, give them the chickens. And it sucks, right?
Yeah.
So so the quickest and dirtiest answer is plant way more than what you think you're going to need.
Yes.
That's the quickest and dirtiest answer. Now, it's not as feasible for many of us, right? But that's going to be whatever you're planting, chances are, unless you've cracked the code, chances are you've planted fewer than you need to get the harvest in at the time you want to preserve. You were talking about this in a recent video of yours on Sandy Bottom Homestead. It was it beans? Was it beans? You were talking about how you wanted to plant more of it. You weren't sure if it was going to work. You wanted to plant more of it, so you weren't. Yeah, it was beans, like sweet beans or maybe snap peas or something. Peas, yeah. So instead of like keeping them in the garden longer is what you were commenting on. You leave them in the garden longer to try to get more off the plant. And you thought, well, maybe I should plant more and then I could pull them out sooner to get to the next crop.
Right.
Right. And same idea. You have.
That was genius, wasn't it?
Well, you also say, you're not sure if it's going to work. So we'll find out next year if it was genius. I mean, there's definitely something to that, because I absolutely am probably similar to Paige. The tag says, the seed packet says this number of days, and I'm waiting. And sometimes I'm a week later, 2 weeks later, and I'm waiting to get to the optimum size to harvest. And this thing is now throwing off my plan because it's in the garden longer than I thought.
Right.
Longer than I wanted. So I think you do have some logic there, and I'm interested to see how it works out for you. But the reason why it's not necessarily feasible is like, once you've decided what you want to eat fresh versus what you want to preserve, and then you figure out, are you preserving, so this is the next layer of the onion, are you preserving the whole ingredient similar to what you've described, just preserve the tomatoes, or are you preserving parts of a recipe?
Right.
So tomatoes come in when they come in. A lot of people do this for tomatoes. And I know Paige didn't ask necessarily about tomatoes. And I know young Ben doesn't like this method. They throw them in a freezer.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Bit by bit, throw them in the freezer.
Yeah.
And then they preserve them when they feel like they have the time and enough to do so. Now, that's probably one of the few vegetables that work in that way, I think.
Well, we need to get to the formula. But you have a point.
I've been waiting on you to lay it on us.
Yeah, you have a point. And so before we get started in that, I just want to say one thing. Don't be scared to small batch can, which is multiple times you're canning. When you see on social media and stuff, people are like, I canned 58 jars of tomato sauce. It's like, well, how big are their garden? How many tomato plants do they have? There's nothing wrong. And I do it all the time. I'll post a picture where I can 3 cans. I mean, yeah, it takes work, but food is not easy. There's nothing about, especially the preserving part, that's easy. Nobody's ever said it's easy to do. It takes time, it takes effort, and it's almost like a hobby. So as we get into this, think about, and I want to focus on fresh eating. So give me a produce that you want to eat fresh.
Broccoli.
You want to eat broccoli, of course. No, don't do broccoli. Do something that does multiples of harvest. Because, broccoli is like, how many heads of broccoli do you eat,
Well, it still creates the same type of challenge that she's describing. Cucumbers.
Okay, cucumbers. So what I'm doing is I'm Googling how much will one cucumber plant produce. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So look, there's a lot of wishy-washy here, but you just go with what you can get. Okay. What we've come up here is, let's say you love cucumbers. I don't think this is a good one, but 1 to 3 pounds of fruit per week during the peak harvest period of your cucumber plant. So it can give you a total of 20 to 25 pounds of fruit per plant. Okay. So now you need to think, how many cucumbers do you eat in a week? If you tell me one,
probably at the height, 2, maybe 3.
3 cucumbers.
Mm-hmm. So
what is that? Yeah, that'd be 1 pound roughly a week.
Sure.
Okay. This isn't a good one to go by.
This is what you get for asking me.
Okay. I'm gonna
so
go
we're
back
on the
to
6th thing that you asked me, and I said, and you said, no, that's not a good one. Why don't you choose one?
Let me just do the one I went with originally then, because it worked out well. So I did Brussels sprouts. Okay. So how many Brussels sprouts per plant? And we just get a quick answer. It is, let's see, about 1 pound of Brussels sprouts per plant, roughly. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you go, now I have to think about how much does my family eat Brussels sprouts? Now we eat a lot of Brussels sprouts. So you buy the bags at the store, those little bags, and they're roughly about a half a pound. So we'll eat 2 to 3 of those a week in the wintertime. Okay. So if I eat 2 to 3 of those and they're half a pound, that's 1.5 pounds a week that we eat. So that's more than one plant. Now we go through and we have to say, that's perfect scenario getting 1 pound, right? Now, we all know that I have trouble growing Brussels sprouts, but let's just say that we did not have a lot of trouble and all of our plants got to harvest. We're not going to get 1 pound of Brussels sprouts per plant, more than likely. So I like to be a little bit cautious and go down to about 0.5 pound per plant. So if we go 0.5 pound per plant, that's 1 meal per plant for us. If we do it 3 times a week, then we need 3 plants a week for us to eat fresh. And then you go through and say, well, how long do you want to eat those for? Because there is a real thing about getting tired of eating a certain thing. And so what we did is I went through and I said, well, usually we eat them over about a 2-month period. And it will fluctuate. Sometimes we'll eat 2 bags. Sometimes we'll eat 3. We don't generally eat more than 3. So we say, okay, 0.5 pound per plant, which happens to be per meal. And that's we did 7 plants. That's 21 plants that we put in. That's 21 meals. So that would be 7 weeks of Brussels sprouts. Right?
I'm with you.
Okay, it makes sense. So then if you go that way, you say, well, if we grow 1 bed, then we get 21 meals of Brussels sprouts. Now, or 7 weeks. But if we go back and we say, well, we're going to eat 2 times, then, it obviously extends that harvest date and then the amount that the frequency that we can consume them. But that's basically how you can get into how much can you eat. Now, you can be as liberal as you want with it and say, I'm going to grow the best ever, and I'm going to get 1 pound per plant and do it that way. And then, you can adjust it so that if everything went perfect and I grew 21 pounds, then I would be eating for 42 meals. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that vegetables so a part of what I'm doing this year, as I prepare for next year, I've started to make my list of the things I want to grow. That's where I start. What plants do I want to grow? What vegetables do I want to grow? And I'm making a notation of things that store versus not. Things that I can easily preserve versus not. Right? And the concept would be anything that I'm growing I could eat fresh, right? And store meaning like something like, sweet potatoes, something like white potatoes, something like squash, winter squash, I should say. Something like onions, like things that are going to store over a number of months, garlic, right? So I'm putting that in one category. And then the things that I am comfortable and have the desire to preserve through some method. So that could be freezing, that could be dehydrating, that could be canning, and so on. And so when I look at this, I think to myself, it sounds great that now I know how many Brussels sprout plants make sense for me. Mm-hmm. Right. You know, let's pretend like I eat them as often as you and your family does. I think that it's easy to think about, all right, for potatoes, how many potatoes do I really want to include in my diet over the course of time? And how long will those potatoes last? It's much easier once you get an idea of, for these vegetables that have a shelf life that's much longer. And then I'm working my way back to things that absolutely have a ticker on them. You know, so a lot of our fruiting plants, because greens generally in my garden and in my kitchen last much longer once they're harvested than any fruiting plant.
Right.
You know, so that would be like the third set of things that I look into. But for my fruiting plants, those are the troublemakers in my garden, because you have to figure out what to do with them. Right. Because they're going to be the first to go bad. When you talk about your Brussels sprouts and you say this is how many times I'm eating, it's almost like you have to come up with a true, like, detailed meal plan over the course of a number of months. And I'm just not for that. Right. You know, that's just not my desire. What I would be doing in that example is, do I feel like I could be comfortable and would I enjoy consuming that many Brussels sprouts? And if I'd say, oh, you know what, I really don't want to eat them that often, then I cut back plants using it. The thing that's hard to fold into it is, but what about the other vegetables that you're going to be eating from your garden? Right. Right.
Well, and I mean, the goal is,
how many more days and meals do you have to cover?
Well, and the thing is that you have to remember too is this is all dependent on your goals as a gardener too. You know, are you just trying to supplement? Are you trying to eat all of it? You know, so I mean, you have to go in through there, and I mean, yeah, you may not want to know exactly, but this is just, you know, if you're trying to figure out how much to grow, I think clearly you want to produce your own food if you're trying to figure out, you know, because there's a lot of people, and I know a lot of people personally, they're like, yeah, I got a tomato plant and I got a couple peppers, and, you know, they're just happy as they can be. But then there's a whole nother category of people that really want to try and figure out, because they want to maximize their space. And you can figure out like how much you're going to eat in a certain period. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I looked it up for tomatoes. A tomato plant, and this varies greatly, but 10 to 30 pounds of tomatoes per plant, right? That's a big spread. And over the years, you will learn, like, you know, I'm sure I probably get 15, maybe 20 pounds of tomatoes off of a Roma plant. But if I grew, what did I grow this year? I grew Abe Lincolns. I didn't get 10 to 30 pounds off that. I maybe got a pound off that plant. You know what I mean? So I figured out over time, this is how this works. And then you figure out, because how many tomatoes can you eat fresh? I mean, I ask you because I don't eat them fresh, really.
Yeah, I probably would eat at a real, like, concerted effort 5 tomatoes. And I'm thinking like slicer size tomatoes.
A week?
A week.
Yeah.
So almost one a day.
So one a day. And then, I mean, this depends too, because when you get to fruiting plants, it's even more complicated, because some tomatoes grow to be a pound. Some tomatoes grow to be 2 ounces, you know, so you've got to be realistic on that front. But if you think about it in that manner, then I would up my tomato game. You know what I mean? If you're eating a tomato a day and you want to process them, you're going to need to have some serious tomato plants, because you can look at the recipes you want to process and it'll tell you how many pounds you need. Yeah.
So just a couple of quick notes. And I did a pretty good job at tracking what my Romas produced this year. So I had 4 Roma plants growing in the garden. 4 Roma plants grow in the garden. 2 produced at what I would say my expectations were for the plant. And the other 2 barely made what I would, if you put those together, a whole plant. So I'm going to call it 2 plants that I basically got production from. And I had just under 25 pounds of tomatoes from those 2 plants. That's pretty startling for me.
That's 12.5 pounds per plant. at an average tomato plant yields 10 to 30 pounds. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I think that when they give you ranges, most people are at the bottom of the range per plant.
So I separately, and one of my girlfriends has just been teasing me endlessly around this. So I have been buying through my farmer's market seconds. So the tomatoes in a box that, maybe aren't the sexiest, maybe they don't look the great. So I was able to get a pretty good deal. So I bought tomatoes through the season for the purpose of, one, I wanted to can tomato sauce primarily, because remember last year it was a pretty year for it. And the year before I didn't can a lot of sauce, right? So I wanted to figure out how many pounds of tomatoes, which we will reveal in a separate episode, does it take for me to produce the sauce that I want? And how much sauce do I want? I really don't know. I kind of have to this is trial and error for me. So this kind of goes back to Paige's question. Some of this is trial and error. So I have a figure about how many tomatoes that I bought, how much sauce that it will produce, or any other method of that I'm using, if I'm doing diced tomatoes, whole tomatoes, or whatever have you. So you put all of that together, and then I look at 2024, and I will know about how often I'm consuming these. Now, the question becomes for tomatoes as an example, do I want to try to grow the number of tomato plants that I think I would require? Let's be aggressive. Let's go with 15 pounds per tomatoes for my aromas. Let's pretend 15 pounds. How many pounds do you need for sauce, and how many plants will that require? Do I want to commit to putting that many plants into my garden?
Right.
So the answer isn't just like how many, right? It's based on what your calculations are, do you really, really want to commit that much of your garden to that thing? The only upside I feel like for aromas are, I can actually mark in my, kind of notebook that I'm not writing notes in, when my aromas were pretty much done and they were kind of just producing randomness. And that means that I could pull those plants out earlier compared to my indeterminates that I'm letting go until the end of the season, right? So when we talk about how much do I want to commit to those plants and how long they'll be in my garden, I don't have the entire growing season that they'll be growing. That's probably the only benefit. Some of the other things you're preserving the same way. It's not as if you're using that garden space for the entire growing year, right? So if you want to go big in a certain area, and in a lot of cases, you'll probably have the rest of the growing season once you've harvested to plant something else. Or on the front end, you planted something in spring, and then, you'll plant the rest in the summer. There's no formula we're going to give you that's going to say this is the playbook for your entire garden and for your family, period. I think the starting point of what the plant is, do you want to eat it fresh or preserve it? And then about how much do you expect that plant to produce? And then you start doing some math. Makes sense? So I do honor your formula. I think it becomes more complex when you add more and more vegetables, but you got to start somewhere.
Well, and I think that's the whole thing is it's a starting point, and it'll get you in the right track. And I mean, look, we've said this many, many times. You're not going to figure it out in one season. I mean, when I Googled here, how much will one tomato plant produce? One of the things people also asked was how much for a family, how many tomato plants do I need for a family of 2? And it says here 2 plants for each person in the family. But that's dependent. That's how much do you like tomatoes? What do you want to do with them? This all factors into it. And I mean, when it comes to the preserving of the tomatoes and stuff, let's say your family eats spaghetti sauce once a week and you want to make your own spaghetti sauce. You better plant some tomato plants. And you better be planting, if each plant produces, and we'll go off yours because it's 10 to 30 pounds, let's just say 15 pounds, then you're going to need to plant roughly, you're going to get 2 jars of tomato sauce out of, you got to plant, no, you're not. You're going to get
4 jars of tomatoes.
4 jars out of each one. But if you want enough sauce to go through the whole year, then 4 times 52 is 200. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to do this. So there's a way to do it. And I mean, I know it's like people, and I may say what you said wrong, and correct me if I am. You didn't want to, think about how much of a certain plant you were going to eat. Is that what you said?
We were talking yesterday?
No, just now.
No, I don't remember.
I think it was like you didn't feel comfortable like thinking like this is how much I'm going to eat of this or that or the other.
Oh, yeah. The idea is, committing to saying I'm going to eat this much of this thing,
right? And
folding in this next thing and this next thing, right?
So have you ever?
Like, who's really doing that?
So let's say that you didn't feel comfortable, and you just grew your Brussels sprouts, but you grew too many. Would you eat those extra Brussels sprouts, or would you throw them away?
I'd force them down.
Yeah, so you eat them that year, and then the next year, like, look, I'm going to cut back.
You make adjustments.
Make adjustments, And I think thinking about how much you're going to eat really does help you. And then, like, for us, as far as the Brussels sprouts go, if we got 5 pounds per plant, I'd be happy. You know what I mean? We would just eat. We'd give them away, whatever it took. We wouldn't waste it. But I think part of the gardening story is knowing what you eat and being in tune with it. That's like the unsung part of it sometimes.
I think it's becoming in tune with what you eat. And everyone's different. There's some people that have, very detailed information on, from grocery store lists to budgets and all of this, so they know the thing. But I feel like the thing shifts when you start growing your own food, right? So I'm eating, when you said buy the Brussels sprouts, I may have bought Brussels sprouts a handful of times in my life.
Yeah.
I enjoy them. I'll have them as a side if I'm out for dinner or something. I grow them because I'm curious about growing them. And I know, there's a really good recipe out there that I'll enjoy them. But otherwise I wouldn't eat them. Forget once a week, if I eat them a couple of times a year even. But I've made adjustments because the things that, I mentioned this to you for collard greens. I eat collard greens more now, in these last 5 or 6 or 7 years than I ever did before, than I ever did growing up.
Yeah.
But it's something that I can grow. I eat more tomatoes. I eat a lot of fresh tomatoes, even the crap tomatoes during the off season. So maybe that's not a good example. But I eat much more tomato products than I have previously. And that's a part of it too. So when I said, think about how many plants it takes. So a part of the decision I'll have to make around tomatoes is, do I want to try to grow the number that I think I need next year on my own? Or do I want to say, because I'm not growing all of my own food, that's something that I'm going to trust that I'll have a farmer's market connect and I'll buy and I'll use that space to grow some other things.
Right.
Right.
And that's the decisions. The gamble.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. It's a gamble. That's one side of the gamble. It's also a gamble if you dedicate this entire bit of your garden to this plant or those plants and there's not success.
Now, I mean, who's to say that you're growing your tomatoes and you're like, look, I'm done. I've got everything I needed. Mm-hmm. Who says you can't pull up a plant and then stick some bush beans behind it and then start on that? You know what I mean? Who's to say you can't do that? Or you can plop in your Brussels sprouts or something at that time. There's all these things that we can do that kind of further it. As a gardener, you have more control than we think we do. You can terminate a plant when you feel it's time to terminate a plant. There is it is not in writing anywhere. I will say this, that you have to let a plant grow until it's done producing. It is not anywhere written down. And I think
no, absolutely.
That's something that we need to remember, because I seem to forget it as well, is this is still producing. Let me keep going. And there just comes a time where it's like, you know what? I'm good. I'm done. I don't want any more turnips. I'm over it. Like I'm throwing these billy goats in the trash, son.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a little bit of fear that's associated with that. Like, I don't want to, God bless you, I don't want to get rid of the thing because, it's producing and I don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to, what happens if the next thing doesn't produce as well? So there's a lot of that twisted and tied up into that. I do want to go to the green beans because I think that's one of the ones that she mentioned. God bless you.
Thank you.
Cucumbers, green beans, and squash are the things that people commonly show online that they have far too many of.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't keep up with them. Right. And
Shout out to all those doing that with squash because I don't have that problem. Shout out for all those doing that with squash because I don't have that problem.
Me either, brother. Me either. Just as a side note, and I'm not going to lose my train of thought. It's beans and freezing. So I was at the farmer's market and I bought a couple of honey nut winter squash. And I tried to grow them this year. I've never tasted them, right? So it's supposed to be sweeter. It's smaller and sweeter than a butternut squash. But I saw this, trusted online chef that I follow cook up some one day. And so last year I'm like, oh, I'm getting the seeds. Got the seeds. Roly-polies ate all of my, everything that germinated. So I didn't get a chance to grow them this year. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and buy them now this fall. Like, do I really even want to bother growing them? I could have just missed, that's what I try to do before I go ahead and buy seeds. So let me taste it. Is it really worth my effort? Because it's not an easy, squash isn't an easy thing for me to grow, winter or summer. But as it relates to the beans, I'd say if you have the space, double the amount you grew this year, Paige. And if you find that they're coming on slower than you have, enough to actually preserve. I don't know if you mean preserve as in canning. I'm going to say start freezing some of those until they really start to come on, and there's a lot being produced if you want to instead really want to preserve them by pressure canning them. I think the idea of saving them, unless you can see that you're 2 to 3 days off, you're going to end up disappointed. And I'm talking about that particular vegetable. I think also a note is, and I don't know if I really thought about it this way until you said it, young Ben, the individual product itself. Yeah. Right. So get the tomato. If you don't want to do the freezing trick, just toss them in the freezer, especially if you're water bath canning them, can them, in a couple of jars at a time, right? It's more work because you're going through that process. One of the things that I've been abiding by for pressure canning, at least for the pressure canner that I have, it's recommended that you have a minimum of 4 pints per. And with 4 pints, it takes sometimes a lot for me to get to that, to be quite frank, and again, water bath canning, you can put 1 jar in there. So there's that.
Well, I mean, and here's the deal too. 2 gardeners, 2 different answers. So I don't have that answer and put it in the freezer. I will not do that. I don't like it. I don't know what it is. Call me weird. We have a system. Mm-hmm. So we bring our stuff in the house. It goes in a bowl on the counter. If I'm waiting to get more, then when we bring the next batch in and we're like, yeah, we still don't have enough, we'll take them. We'll go through the ones on the counter, pull out the ones that look like they're getting a little rough and eat them, put the rest in the fridge. And then we have a little basket in the fridge. And so we'll do that. So we have a little system that we've created for that.
That's for beans or just in general? Just
in general, anything in general. So we'll end up doing something like that. And then when it's time, or I'm like, man, my tomatoes aren't producing fast enough. Like, I'm going to go ahead and do a small batch. And even in my small batch, because I'm growing determinants, I can still get 4 or 5 cans out of it. But if I have to do 1 or 2 cans and it's important to me, because I don't look at it as look at how much I canned right now. I look at it as look how much I canned over the season. Yeah. And that's what it's all comes down to.
Yeah, definitely.
And before we move on to the listener question, I have to ask you a question, Batavia. What's the verdict on the honey nut squash?
I haven't eaten it yet.
Damn it.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited about it, though, because they're super small. 2 of them, just like, I'm going to roast them, of course, because that's how I roll. And I'm like, I'm trying to clear my, my list this week. But it's funny because once I cook it up, I'm convinced that I'll love it.
Yeah.
I kind of have to love it because I really want to grow it. But it's a truth moment. Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't love it enough. For the tomatoes, just real quick, you commented on it. I could actually picture you putting some whole tomatoes or diced tomatoes in a jar. Again, you got to make adjustments, right? And especially if you're like, the king or queen of your kitchen and you can decide we're going to change our meal plan this week and we're going to eat something different. That's an excellent approach.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to look at what we have and we're going to make some adjustments. We're going to eat something different tomorrow because this thing is going bad. It's going sideways.
I did learn this year because of that method to eat BLTs. So there is that.
The refrigerator
Did you hear what I said?
You can eat BLTs.
Yeah, but I hate tomatoes fresh.
Oh, well, yeah.
That's a big move on my part. Like, I need a little bit of credit. I need that to sink in. Can I get a bell?
The demands of a co-host. So a part of tomatoes on sandwiches is that mayo tomato mixture. That's the joy of it. You made me lose my train of thought since you demanded a bail on BLTs. We can move on.
That's okay, because you know what? I have to tell you guys, it's getting to be winter. It is time to plant your garden, and there is not a better way to do it than with the Planter app. We have a link below that will get you a discount, so just don't forget that part, discount. You can use it on your tablet, your phone, your computer, drag and drop interface, square foot gardening, tells you everything, companions, combative planting, save multiple profiles from year to year. And the biggest thing that helps is not only does it tell you the companion or the combative, but it tells you why it's that way. Not only that, but I spoke to the gentleman who created it and said that he went and verified everything and took out a lot of stuff that there was no verification for that. So we know that this has been verified data that we can use for our gardens. So definitely check it out. It's available in the Google Store and the Apple Store, and that's the Planter app. I'm getting pretty good at spelling, everybody. I should go on a spelling bee. All right, we got a question of the day here from Spotify. The Spotify question of the day. This comes from Madison. Now, I'm not sure what it means, but we're going to do our best with it, okay? She said, how does gardening in Florida make you feel? Do you feel there is mass production of plants in Florida?
Interesting.
Yeah. So we've actually had this question for a little while, and I was just kind of thinking about it. And I think what she's referring to maybe like flowers and perennials and stuff is what it seems like to me. Mass production. So,
Madison, we challenge you to, once you hear this episode and our response, we challenge you to come on to the Backyard Gardens Community Gardens Facebook page and say, "No, that wasn't it. Yeah. This is what I really meant."
Call us out for being dumb. Yeah.
Or you can go back to Spotify and do it. So my immediate, that's the first time I heard this. Thanks, Young Bien. The question you've been sitting on and mulling over for ages. I'm thinking more of like impact on the environment from like, is mass production okay? Is that good? Is that problematic? You know, that one place is, so in addition to impact on the environment, one place is responsible for so much of insert vegetable, insert fruit, probably more than anything. She's going to make me go ahead and Google how much we're getting from Florida from a food perspective. Well, is that what you're Googling?
No, I'm Googling something different, but I was looking up Bonnie because that's where you get, you know, your transplants from the stores and stuff like that, where they grow them. And I was kind of starting to put two and two together a little bit. And it says they grow them in Alabama. Well, and then they ship them, clearly. So I think there is mass production of plants, but I think it's because of the climate, because they can start them way earlier and basically deliver them to us in a much more mature state than, you know, if I'm starting plants. So my last frost date is roughly April 15th. That's usually, I put my plants in a week later than that. But for me to start my tomato plant and get them ready, I have to start them in February, right? But in February, most people aren't doing that. So, you know, going by the normal, you know, gardener that just has like a garden bed just playing around, and they depend on those Bonnie plants, they can start them earlier than that and bring them to us much more mature than they have to be. So that being said, I think it's because of climate why it would make sense, because they get warmer sooner, this, that, and the other. You know what I mean? So I do think there's mass production of plants. I don't know if that's a bad thing, though. Do you think it's a bad thing?
Well, I mean, I think that being put on the spot, no, I don't think it's a bad thing. It does give me a tinge bit of pause. So a quick couple of searches. and this is from the California Department of Food and Ag, over a third of the country's vegetables and nearly 3/4 of the country's fruits and nuts are grown in California. A third of the country. Because I started the search with how much how much of our food comes from Florida. I couldn't get that direct of an answer from Florida with, again, just a couple of minutes of trying to Google it. It does say, again, I'm trying to get to what could be trusted. It's, Florida's branding portal, whatever that means. And they're quoting 400 acres of fruit and tree nuts in 2021. That doesn't help me much because I can't visualize what that is, how much that is. But I mean, I think that I'm going to go with no, it doesn't bother me because I don't know how much is really coming from there. And I don't know if I've formulated a thought on how much is too much.
Yeah.
And if I take Madison's question and make it my own, it does make me want to look into the biggest producers of what come from where.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as like buying plants and putting them in, I mean, if you were to buy them locally, you would not be able to get them into the ground until the next fall, roughly, because they'd have to grow and all that stuff. So it's a way to...
Well, they'd be growing indoors under, they'd be growing in greenhouses and things. They probably would be much more expensive too.
Well, that's the thing. You're getting the cost passed to you. So, I'm imagining, like, I know for me, when I grow my seeds and stuff like that, a lot of them I try and do as much as I can outside. Saves time, money, clean up, less maintenance on it and stuff like that. So it definitely makes sense to do it that way. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's almost a necessary evil, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
But I don't even know if it's evil. The only evil part is, and I'll tell you this from my experiences, when I buy a plant, I put it in my yard, and it's clearly a tropical-ish plant that supposedly is tolerant to our frost level, and it's not. It's because that plant wasn't raised in your area. That's the one issue that I have, whereas if the plant was raised in your area, it may be kind of used to your climate already. But when you're getting these plants and they're coming from Florida, Alabama, or I guess even California, and it's already 80 degrees, and then it bring it here and it's 50 degrees, barely warm enough to keep them alive, that's a shock to the plant. Not to mention the ride in the truck and all that stuff. So, and I'm sure the trucks don't have grow lights in them.
But I think that most of these plants bounce back from that.
But it still sets it back.
Yeah, you could be starting from a step back. But I think the best alternative would be, so good, better, best. You're starting it on your own, would be the best. Better, what is it? Yeah, good, better, best. Good is getting them from, out of state. Better is getting them locally. Best is starting them in your own shed, backyard, basement.
Yeah. And if you're not doing it, it truly is a rewarding thing to start your own plants. So thank you, Madison. If you'd like to leave a question, you can leave it on any of our platforms and just label it, for lack of a better term, Spotify question, because Spotify has a feature where you can interact with us, but we can't interact with you. So there you go. Good job, Spotify. You can leave it on Facebook at Backyard Community Gardens, which is our Facebook group. You're more than welcome to join in the conversation. Sandy Bottom Homestead, my YouTube, Batavia's YouTube, Be Better Garden. All of the Instagrams, same thing. So check them out there. And the one thing I have to ask you, Batavia, with my formula, do you think it's boo-boo or do you think it is not boo-boo?
Well, I don't use that kind of word.
What word do you use?
So I never thought that it was. It was more like bull boo-boo is what that's probably what I said initially.
I'm trying to be family friendly here.
I do think that your formula is legit. Hard stop, right?
Oh, hard stop.
I think implementing your formula across a garden is hard.
Yeah.
But this whole thing is hard. So just one final thought from me. I said, who's doing that earlier? Try to figure out how much of a thing you're eating. And many of those folks that are listening are. and many of the folks that are listening, including you and I, aspire to be. Right. That's the whole thing here. Like, I want to eat everything that I grow if I'm not giving it away. I want to eat all of it. And I need to figure out ways to do that. Right. And then you fold in, I want to figure out ways to do that are less time consuming, that retain the most quality, and the beat goes on.
There you go, everybody. I'm not full of it totally. Just 3/4 of the way full of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody. Well, you know what we did today? I think we learned to grow, and we grow for change.
How much did we do of either? I don't know. See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.